high time we said good morning to Steph Lunn, who is our guest this morning. Steph, welcome to the programme. Catchy title you have, Project Manager NHS Mental Capacity Act Project. What exactly is mental capacity then?
Okay, so you're right, it is a catchy title. We try to start off by explaining to people it's about choice. It's about the right to make your own decisions, because the Mental Capacity Act, that title does put people off. It makes people think it's not about them because it's to do with people who've got a mental health problem, and it's legal and it's quite frightening sounding. But essentially, we all have the right to make our own choices, and these choices include our health care. They include any social care support that we might need, but they also include our everyday choices, like what to wear, what to eat, who to spend time with, where to live. And there are lots of people for whom their ability to make these choices is challenged in some way. So people with learning disabilities, people with dementia. And mental capacity is just straightforwardly whether somebody has the ability to make and weigh up their own decisions or not.
Because most of us on a day-to-day basis, you take it for granted, don't you?
Absolutely.
You're faced with the situations, you say, whether it's what to wear, what to do, where to go, you don't really give it a second thought. I suppose it's only when you're placed in that position that you suddenly realise exactly what we're talking about.
Exactly. And so there are lots of people who their right to make a choice, their right to make a decision, is sometimes overridden because people presume that because of a mental health problem, because of a learning disability, that they perhaps can't make these decisions. And the most important, the kind of primary principle of the Mental Health Act, the Mental Capacity Act, is that people do have the right to make their own decisions, and that actually it's our role as professionals to support them to make those choices for as long as possible.
Because I guess what you're saying is that some people need some protection, don't they?
Exactly, yes. And it's getting that balance right. Because yes, there are people whose thinking ability is impaired, and so you and I might take risks on a day-to-day basis, but we're aware of what those risks are. I often use myself as an example. So I cycle from Snow Hill Station, up Broad Street, up Hagley Road every day to my office, along a really busy road on a little fold-up bike. Now I take that risk, and nobody thinks it's their right to stop me from doing that. And actually, if somebody, despite impaired capacity, understands the risky consequences of what they're doing, then it remains their right to make that choice.
It's the ability to be able to manage things yourself, which we kind of take for granted. Now, the NHS have produced some ads, which are pretty impressive and pretty useful. Let's have a look at one which was made with a gentleman called Richard, and let's hear what he's had to say.
My aunt has decided what she needs for the future, and I'm here to make sure her wishes are respected, especially if she can't speak up for herself.
Having a choice is easy to take for granted. If the time comes that you or your loved ones are unable to make a choice through impairment or incapacity, who would you want to be there for you? For your free advice pack on how the Mental Capacity Act may affect you, call us today on 0121 667 4000.
I suppose part of it, really, Steph, is accepting, because sometimes the person themselves may not be able to make that decision. Somebody's got to make it for them. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So what Richard was talking about there was a thing that's called a lasting power of attorney. A lot of people have heard of that. It's one of the aspects of the Mental Capacity Act. You might also have heard of an enduring power of attorney, which is the old system of the same thing. And it's essentially, whilst you've got capacity to make your own decisions, particularly if you've had a diagnosis of a degenerative condition, or you're aware that your memory is beginning to fail, it's taking the opportunity whilst you've got the ability to make a decision to nominate somebody who can make those decisions on your behalf in the future.
Because I suppose the problems begin to arise if you haven't done this.
Yes.
What happens then?
Okay, so in Richard's aunt's case, she's obviously set him up and knows that he can make her decisions for her. Now, I'm not trying to be a scaremonger, so if you don't have a lasting power of attorney set up, those professionals who are involved in your support, so the health professionals, the social care professionals, they will do their best and they will make what's called a best interests decision on your behalf. And they'll take into account all of the things that are relevant to you, and they should also consult with your family and people who know you. But at the end of the day, it's not the decision that you've made yourself, and you are leaving it in the hands of these people that you don't know. That said, they will always do their best and try to make a decision that would reflect what you would have wanted. But setting out a lasting power of attorney, or another thing called an advanced decision, where you actually write down what you do and don't want for the future, that's another way that keeps you in control.
I suppose as well it stops any legal challenges or anything becoming very messy, doesn't it?
It does. It takes a lot of pressure off your family. A lot of times I talk to people, I've spoken to all kinds of people in libraries and all kinds of places about this issue. And whilst the Mental Capacity Act doesn't only deal with the end of life, a lot of people think about their end of life when you talk about mental capacity. And one of the things about advanced decisions, which sometimes people call living wills, you will maybe have heard that phrase, is that it takes some of the pressure off your family, because you sit down and say, well, I would want this treatment if it was available, but I wouldn't want this treatment. And it rather helps, because then that pressure and that burden isn't on your family to make that decision.
Do some people almost resent somebody broaching this topic with them, saying, what do you mean? Why have I got to make a decision like this? I'm fine, I'm all the rest of it.
Absolutely. In fact, the Ministry of Justice, about 6 months or so ago, ran a campaign. It was called Choice Not Chance, and it basically was trying to encourage people to make wills, but also to nominate lasting powers of attorney. And I quite like their Choice Not Chance slogan. It essentially says this may not happen to you, but at least you've got something in place if it should. And I think that people are beginning to understand the importance of making a will. And I often say, well, in a way, I'm less bothered what happens when I'm dead, but I do mind what happens while I'm still here. And so that's why planning for a time when you may not be able to express yourself is so important.
Because one of the things, of course, if somebody gets an illness or they're taking proprietary drugs which can affect them, very quickly they can go from seeming and being perfectly okay to suddenly people saying, look, you know, they can't decide, they don't know.
Yes.
And that's a critical time.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so just because you set up a lasting power of attorney, it doesn't mean that you've handed over all control at that point. The power of attorney, particularly for health and welfare decisions, is only valid if you lack the capacity yourself. So if you've got a fluctuating condition, sometimes people are more lucid at some times of day, or sometimes people have good and bad patches, they still can maintain the power and the choice and control when they are well. But at that time when they're unable to make the decision, it's helpful to know that someone they know and they love and trust can make it on their behalf.
And I suppose they will turn to you, they will see you've got the experience, that you've got the know-how, you've been involved in this. Do they say to you, Steph, what should I do?
People do that with professionals, and it is tricky. I think doctors, nurses, social workers, physiotherapists, occupational therapists, all these kinds of people are often asked for their advice. But actually that's normal. People with capacity ask those questions. And one of the other principles of the Act is a thing, we call it maximising capacity, giving people the information they need so they can make a decision.
We've been talking about people and their abilities to make informed decisions and things, and I guess that along the way, diet and the way we live forms a part of it. A couple of stories here that the Daily Telegraph this morning say that the junk food diet that Britons now have causes more deaths than smoking.
Oh.
Now that's an article in the Lancet today, which is extraordinary, isn't it? But I suppose when you see the amount of litter, you know how much people go into to junk food. And the Mirror tell us that people can expect to live 5 years longer than they did 25 years ago.
Wow.
So there's a little bit of a contradiction in terms there. We mentioned earlier in the programme that the south of England, that southern swathe, which is where you, of course, are from, is the best to have a strong life expectancy. But when it comes to people and illness and all the problems that you come up against when you face this, I mean, are people's diets and lifestyles a major factor in how they end up, as it were?
Well, I would have to say that's not an area that I'm expert in, but of course my colleagues in public health are working really hard to ensure that we have the right information to make the right choices. None of us make the right choices all of the time, and in some ways life would be very dull if we did. But it's important that people know what the right choices are. And of course, it's got to be both. We've got to do all we can to preserve our physical and mental well-being and make sure that we've got a plan in place for if things should affect our health and affect our ability to make decisions. So I would probably be the least well qualified of my colleagues to comment on that. But it's absolutely clear. I mean, the evidence is overwhelming, isn't it? That our lifestyle has a significant impact on how long we live and how well we live.
You're obviously doing your bit because you were telling me you cycle to work from the train every day.
Yeah.
And you take part in runs.
Yeah,
long
absolutely.
distance runs,
Yeah. I'm a keen amateur sportswoman.
Yeah. I mean, does cycling and all this sort of thing, does it keep the brain sharp?
Well, I mean, some people argue that it does. I think you can't separate your mental well-being and your physical well-being, and that's one of our key points, really, is people think, oh, well, your mental health is only affected if you get dementia. But actually, we know when you come around from a general anaesthetic, or if you have a heavy infection or something that affects your physical well-being, it does affect your ability to understand information, to weigh up, retain information and to make decisions. So I would always advocate that there's a real strong link between your physical and your mental well-being. And for me, I know I'm grumpy. If I take 2 or 3 days off running or swimming, I find that I'm a bit irritable, yeah.
When you're talking to people, as you say, Mental Capacity Act is what we're talking about here. When you talk to people about decisions they've got to make, is it difficult sometimes to know? Are you sitting there thinking, I don't think you can make this decision, and they're sitting there saying, yes, I can?
Absolutely, and professionals up and down the country and family members are faced with that decision all of the time. And the Act takes a really pragmatic approach. It says that if the person can understand the information that's relevant to the decision, if the person can understand the likely consequences of making that decision, and they can communicate what they want, then they do have the capacity. So it's as simple as that, really.
Right.
And we shouldn't be any more cloak and dagger about it than that.